One of the most interesting discussions about esports and game balance is, does a good game really need any patches if the balance seems to be in a good shape? Should the developers interfere into the esports landscape, and how players should adapt to those conditions? Take StarCraft Brood War as an example. This game is almost 26 years old, but can you guess when it had its last balance patch? The answer is, it was in May 2001. And after that date, Brood War received 0 balance updates while having more than 20 years of vibrant esports history. Of course, it got a lot of bug fixes, new maps and quality of life changes, but the balance was set in stone. You might think that the meta got stale, people were playing the same 1, 2 or maybe 3 build orders, and there was clearly one race that was just slightly overpowered. But no, StarCraft Brood War, on the contrary, had a long and rich history with different races and also long-standing champions called Bonjoas, players like Flash, Jaedong, Bisu and many others you heard of even if you haven't watched or played StarCraft 1. But it was not only about the players, it was also about the meta that has been constantly evolving since 2001 despite having 0 balance changes. This deserves a separate video for this topic, but you can check Tasteless and Arthos's channels to gain more insight into some meta shifts. But for StarCraft 2, it has never been the same. Even though there were years when the game had a big gap between balance patches, it wouldn't really last more than a couple of months most of the time. So, is it actually good or bad? It's quite obvious that almost every game needs patching for the first couple of months or even years. This also applies to balance as well. The developers just cannot foresee every possible tactic that can be created by players. But at what point should you stop the interference? Let's first list the positive things that every balance patch brings. Every update shakes up the scene quite a bit, and this is what a lot of players are looking for. There might be build orders, tactics, units, or just stuff that you don't really like about the game. You just don't enjoy how it all plays out, independent from it being balanced or not. Every patch brings this freshness, and that's what many players are looking for. New emotions, new strategies, new balance complaints. Second of all, different patches create opportunities for different players. Every race in the history of StarCraft 2 had many periods where only one particular playstyle was much stronger than the others, and was obviously affecting some of the pro players and even casuals. For example, in Wings of Liberty, the mech playstyle wasn't as strong and competitive as it is nowadays, or as a Protoss player, you had to master different all-ins and cheeses because the race was specifically strong with such playstyles compared to a more ordinary macro. So, depending on players' preferences, any patch could have a significant impact on the esports landscape. The last reason is quite obvious. Sometimes you never even know for sure when or if the community and players are going to figure out the optimal meta that satisfies every race. There was an incredibly fun example of Wings of Liberty when Zerg players were asking other races to be patient and wait until pro players will find a way to deal with Broodlords, right at the same time when the tournaments were just dominated by the vast majority of Zerg players, many of whom would fall off after the Broodlords were fixed. While all those times many people were not sure if the patch was necessary, in hindsight, it became absolutely clear that it was the only way to deal with the problem, and probably no amount of time and figuring out could help solve this issue. There are also arguments against patching the game and touching the balance, which don't really contradict the things that we mentioned just before, but they still make a lot of sense, and here's why. The problem with balance patching is that it affects esports results in a more complicated way. Brood War balance has been the same for 20 years, and if you become a champion, it means that you truly master the game that's very old and you have risen up in the ranks to stand alongside other legendary players. But for StarCraft 2, it's not so easy to tell. If you take a look at many Wings of Liberty or How to Do Swarm clips with pro players, you'll have a very strange feeling. It looks like you're watching a Diamond replay, just not the very best players, because StarCraft 2 has changed so much during those years. Just take the economy, for example, as we just discussed in one of our recent videos that you can watch here. People often argue who was the best Terran player in history of StarCraft 2. Was it MVP who dominated Wings of Liberty in times when the competition was at peak? Or Innovation, who was also strong and dominant in 2 different expansions when the game has already been figured out. Or Maru, who is still an absolute beast with his record in GSL in the most recent updated StarCraft 2, but with less old school players and less competition. It's really difficult to tell. The same is true for some players who would rise and fall again depending on what patch they are playing. It raises the question, is it a player who got better or worse? Or is it because the game was changed in a way that contributes to the player's success or failure? Even Serral was doubted during his first undefeated reign, but he was able to prove his status later on, playing on many different patches. But this couldn't really be said about all the players. Another problem is, the game changes so much and fast that you constantly have to adjust, renovate and reinvent over and over again. It has a good side as we already discussed, but it has a negative impact too. The legendary build orders and their authors are forgotten, and the community is not transferring its experience from the past days. There is no link between Wings of Liberty builds, players and playstyles, and 2024 Legacy of the Void. And also, players don't have much time to invent new stuff as well. Parting's Soul Train appeared only in 2012, when Protoss players were seeking for new methods to deal with annoying broodlords in Festor's late game. And Zerg players had Stefano, who came up with 200 Roach max out, which was a very unusual tactic as well. However, the majority of those build orders and strategies didn't really appear immediately. It took weeks and even months for players to create, master and then popularize those strategies. That couldn't really happen as often and as much if the game gets constantly changed. Hell, even some units were designed for a different usage, like oracles, but in 1 year, many creative players managed to invent a completely new build order featuring them, like Has, who created Mass Oracle's playstyle, which seemed absolutely crazy, but actually worked and was even nerfed later on.
Picking up 4, 5 drone kills, a 6th goes down, a 7th and 8th, oh that is absolutely devastating, and Haas takes a 10 worker lead already.
He's a legend, he's just a legend.
And from here, Haas has this
Two more
planned out
Stargates,
precisely. Mass Oracle. It's going to be Mass Oracle?
Triple Stargates.
Oh my god.
Are you serious? Like this is the 3rd base being on the threat already. Queen's got sniped. And now it's going to be one more, or more drones dying. Look at this guy, I can't even believe it here. He's like, oracles and Haas. This is just too much.
That was like the pace of anyone watching Haas game right there. That was too perfect.
So patching an esports game is a difficult task. It's not just stats, units and balance, it's also the ecosystem, the impact on the pro scene and the whole community. And whether you patch the game or not, both choices have their own pros and cons. It will be very interesting to see whether StarCraft 2 will finally have its one last patch, or whether it will be updated for the next 5 or maybe even 10 years in the future. What do you think about the current StarCraft 2 meta and whether it has to change? Leave your opinion in the comments and check out our other content about different meta, build orders and balance periods in StarCraft 2. Have a nice day and see you next time.